Good afternoon. I'm Heather Collick, Editor-in-Chief of NAEYC's professional magazine, Teaching Young Children. I'm here with my colleague, Lisa Hansel, Editor-in-Chief of NAEYC's peer-reviewed journal, Young Children, to welcome you to NAEYC's Playful Math webinar. We'd like to start by thanking all of the early childhood educators who have joined us for this webinar. We know you are busy professionals, and we deeply appreciate that you have chosen to spend some time with us. We're excited to share that over 2,100 people signed up to deepen their knowledge of early mathematics. We know you'll find that this is time well spent, as we are joined by three experts whose work focuses on supporting teachers in implementing intentional, playful, and engaging mathematics activities. Deborah Stipek is a professor of education and the former dean of the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University. She directs the Heising-Simons Development and Research in Early Math Education Network. Kristen Reed is a project director at Education Development Center. She has worked as a teacher, curriculum developer, professional development facilitator, and researcher. Jessica Mercer-Young is a research scientist and developmental and educational psychologist at Educational Development Center. She specializes in early learning. All three have written for NAEYC's publications. Deborah's article, Playful Math Instruction in the Context of Standards and Accountability, is in the July 2017 issue of Young Children. Kristen and Jessica are co-authors of a series in Teaching Young Children called Play Games, Learn Math. After the presentations, we'll have time for questions. Before we get started, a few housekeeping details. If you have questions you want to ask presenters, write them in the question box on the lower left side of your screen. The authors will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentations. Some people using a telephone line may experience a slight delay. You will have the best experience using the sound on your computer. We'd like to start with getting to know the audience. A question should appear on your screen asking what age children do you typically work with. We'll give you a few seconds to answer, then share the results. Most of you work with preschoolers. Now we'll turn to Deborah Stipek to learn more about the Research Foundation for Playful Math Instruction.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I realize that I'm probably talking to the choir here. Most of the people in this webinar are already convinced of the importance of early math. But I want to share some research findings with you just in case you have to convince others, maybe your director or your colleagues or parents. I think it's well known now that the early years of life are extremely important for children. There's a significant amount of brain development that occurs then, that during the first 5 years, the architecture of the brain is being affected by the kinds of experiences that children have. And that architecture serves as the foundation for future learning. Preschool years are particularly important for executive functions. As you can see in this slide, that it's during the ages of about 4 and 5 where you get incredible growth in the prefrontal cortex that is responsible for executive functions. For those of you who may not be familiar with that term, it refers to basic cognitive skills like working memory, the ability to focus and shift attention, and impulse control that are extremely important for children both in their social skills development and in their academic skills. Another reason for focusing on early math is that it is a very big issue for those of us who are concerned with equity and the achievement gap. As you can see from this slide, there is a huge difference between the skill levels of 4-year-olds who are from families with low incomes compared to families who are more middle income or more affluent. Estimates are that when children enter kindergarten, children from low-income families are already about a year or a year and a half behind children from more affluent families. And as you can see from this slide, the skills that children enter school with are very highly predictive of their math achievement throughout school. The yellow line at the top are children who enter kindergarten in the top quartile. The middle line are children who are in the middle 50%, and the bottom line are the children who are in the lowest quartile. You'll see that there's actually a fan so that the gap gets larger. In some ways, you can think of this as the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. So the skills that children enter with are very, very important. Another reason to be concerned about children's opportunities to learn math in their early years is that they need to be prepared to meet much more rigorous standards by the end of kindergarten than they have in the past. Not all states have subscribed to the Common Core kindergarten standards, but even those states that haven't, the standards have risen in most states. So if you look across these expectations for children by the end of kindergarten, it's very clear that they're not going to achieve them however good the instruction is if they haven't had some experience laying the foundation for math in the earlier years before they enter kindergarten. Partly because the standards have become more rigorous, the instruction has become more rigorous, so that there are much higher expectations for what children are going to be doing in kindergarten than there used to be. So if you look at this slide, it represents a nationally representative study of kindergarten teachers. It compares what kindergarten teachers report doing in 1998 to the year 2000. So it's basically 12 years gap. Let's just look at place value. You can see that there's been a substantial increase in the number of kindergarten teachers who report working on place value on a weekly basis between 1998 and 2010. Same for writing equations and probability. Basically, most of the more advanced math activities showed an increase over that 12-year period. One of the papers that was written using these data, the title is "Kindergarten is the New First Grade," because the content of the kindergarten curriculum now looks very much like the content of the kindergarten curriculum in first grade 12 years in a decade or two ago. Now, some practitioners don't like standards. They don't like the Common Core standards. They think they're too rigorous. They just generally don't like standards. The kinds of complaints I hear are that they focus too much attention on academic skills and away from other important dimensions of development like social emotional skills and self-regulation, that they encourage inappropriate teaching, and in general that kind of teaching undermines the joy of learning. In a lot of the schools that I visit, I actually see these problems manifested, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, even under standards. I actually think that standards are useful. I'm a proponent of them. And I also don't agree that the Common Core standards are too high, and I think some of the reasons that we see them as being too rigorous and too demanding or developmentally inappropriate is that we haven't been giving children in preschool and in their early years a lot of opportunities to develop their skills. In the classrooms I visit, where teachers are providing really meaningful opportunities for children to learn math, I see children doing really amazing things. So my sense is that we have underestimated what children can do, and once we give them some good opportunities to develop their math skills, those rigorous Common Core standards or whatever standards are being used in states for kindergarten are actually not developmentally inappropriate. And the standards can actually be quite useful. As long as we don't become a slave to them, they can serve as a guide that informs the curriculum we choose and the formative assessments we use to assess children's progress. They can tell us where we want our children to end up, but they don't tell us how we get them there, nor do they tell us how fast children need to progress. If you are required to use pacing guides, and I have been in a lot of preschool classrooms where pacing guides are being embraced by principals and directors, my advice is to rebel because instruction needs to be based on children's skills and understanding, not on somebody's idea of the appropriate speed at which children should master material. So let's assume that you are convinced that we need to provide children some opportunities to learn math. I assume that you wouldn't have signed on to this webinar if you weren't convinced of that. And regardless of how anyone feels about the standards, we still have to figure out how we're going to help children develop their math skills and understandings that they need to know to make sure that all children are prepared to be successful in kindergarten. And that means we need to teach math. Now, the word teaching, in my experience, has a bad rap. And when I talk to practitioners, I often avoid the word teaching because it conjures up the kind of interactions with children that they don't think are developmentally appropriate and actually aren't developmentally appropriate. So I refer to providing learning opportunities. To me, that's what good teaching is, so it doesn't seem too much of a stretch. A lot of teachers, when they hear the word teaching, they think we're talking about didactic instruction, flashcards, and worksheets. They're fearful that teaching, if that's the way they think of it, is going to interfere with children's learning and natural curiosity, and then it's going to compete with the other things that everyone knows are really, really important for children's development: time for play, time to develop their social and emotional skills. We have been dominated in the field of early education by theories of teaching, which I think are create a kind of false dichotomy that are really opposed to very different ways of thinking about what the educational environment should look like for young children. So on the one hand, we have people who endorse a play-based, child-centered, constructivist. There are lots of terms that are used to discover this, but the emphasis is on providing children opportunities to discover through direct experience, to engage with materials. The emphasis is put on children choosing and taking their own initiative in the activities that they engage in through the day in the preschool. Process rather than outcomes or getting right answers is stressed. Play is a critical feature of what I'm referring to as child-centered programs. On the other hand, you have a theory which focuses on teacher direction. The idea is that children learn what the teachers teach, the teachers choose the activities, and the way children engage with them in the classroom. Performance is stressed. Children are supposed to get right answers, and they're given feedback if they don't. And in some ways, I think that we think of play is what the child-centered approach is, and teacher-directed is really work. It's not play or fun for kids. It's really, in my opinion, a false dichotomy. Neither approach is effective in promoting children's academic skills. Children won't discover a basic sense of number entirely on their own, on the one side, and drill and kill and teacher-directed didactic instruction is neither engaging or effective. I think there's considerable agreement now among people who focus on math instruction that the most effective way to promote math is neither of these, or a little bit of both, but I think it's really a third alternative, not a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Effective instruction in math has the teacher in a very critically important role. The teacher is planning activities with clear learning goals. Teachers identify, design, and prepare materials. They provide direction and guidance, and they engage children in conversation. And I really want to underscore the importance of conversation because, first of all, math involves a lot of language, and children need to learn the language. But also, it's through the conversation that teachers learn about how children are making sense of the math work that they're doing. And they need to be able to know how teachers are making sense of math because good instruction is building on children's own sense-making. So assessing learning and assessing children's understandings are a critical part of the teacher's role. And as children assess learning and understand better what children's skills are, how they're making sense of various aspects of math, they are designing individual and group interventions. They're building on what children know in productive ways. Now, this can be playful. And I want to describe one activity that is actually on a PBS website that you can sign on to. I think the web address is on the slide that you're seeing. So here's how the activity works, and I'm just going to use this as an example of how the teacher is deeply involved in planning, preparing, guiding instruction, assessing children's understanding, and building on it. So in this particular activity, the children all take their shoes off. Actually, they only take one shoe off. And then they collaborate as a group to develop a classification system. And they come up with a classification of their shoes. I think in this case they have shoes that have ties, they have sandals, they have slip-ons, and I think there's another category they came up with. The teacher had prepared a shower curtain in a grid, and she had the students put the shoes in the boxes on the grid in columns, and then she engaged the children in a conversation about what they had just done. So how many shoes are in each category? How many slip-ons? How many sandals? She had them compare which category of shoes has the most. How many more sandals are there than slip-ons? How many more lace shoes would we need to have the same number of sandals? It's through this process of engaging these children in conversations that helps her understand what their understanding of counting and addition is. And actually, there's a little subtraction in here. Then children were asked to get a card that had a number, a numeral on it, and then place it at the bottom of each of the columns to indicate the number of shoes in that category in the column. Now, there's a lot of math in this activity. There's categorization, there's counting, comparing, operations, graphing, data analysis, written representation, all in this activity. It also involves a lot of cooperation among the children. So it is an opportunity for them to develop their social skills as well as their math skills. But I want you to notice how much planning went into this activity, that the teacher was very much involved in giving direction and guiding, engaging children in conversation. But if you sign on to this on the PBS website, what you will see is children who have no idea that they're engaged in academic work. They are having a blast. It's like a game to them. So it's why I think of it as a playful activity, because they are really engaged in a very playful setting. There are other activities, and we're going to spend, I think, the rest of this webinar in giving you some examples. I'm just going to give you a few. Another PBS activity has a grid on a board that the teacher has written the children's name into with one letter per square, and then she engages the children in a conversation about who has the most letters in their name, who has the least letters, how many more letters does Diego have and Sarah, and so on. Again, an opportunity to surface what children understand and what their counting skills are. I've seen classrooms where the teachers take the children on a shape hunt, and they discuss the defining characteristics of a shape. So, for example, are the shapes at the top of the window on the left of the shape hunt square there, are those triangles? Why? Why not? To tap children's understanding of what are the qualities of a triangle. Making maps of a classroom to develop spatial skills and language. Playing store with numbers glued onto the objects that children can buy in the store. Picture books can be used very productively in the teaching of mathematics, whether it's counting, recognizing shapes, understanding spatial relations, developing language about spatial relations like behind, in front of, under, comparison language, tall, thin, wide, and so on. One of the activities that I like we call describe, draw, describe, where children describe a picture that they're looking at, and it can be varying in complexity. Then they draw it, and then they describe what they've drawn. It's a great way to develop math language. So many games are available, tangrams, dominoes. One of the games that I really like we call it compare and double compare. Some people think of it as war. Basically, children just take regular cards in a deck of cards, and they each have a pile of cards. They each place one card on the table, and then they have to decide which of them has the card with the highest number on it, and whoever has the highest number wins the two cards. I like this activity because you can vary the difficulty level really easily. So if you have children who are really just beginning to learn to count, you might have in their deck only cards up to 5. For more advanced children, you can have them each put down 2 cards at a time, and they have to add the 2 cards, and the winner has the sum that's the highest. In all of these activities, I just want you to know this, that the teacher has a clear learning goal in engaging the children in the activity that is developmentally appropriate, and that she has chosen because it builds on teachers' current skills and understandings. The materials are prepared or they're chosen in advance, and the teacher provides a lot of direction and engages the children in conversation. I think there's pretty good evidence now that even in preschool, you need to have dedicated time to engage in these very planful math activities, but you can also weave math into the whole day. You can't rely on child-initiated activities or sort of naturally occurring opportunities to teach math, because some children will end up not getting any math, and most children won't get all the math that they need to cover to be well prepared for kindergarten. So you do need to have that planned, purposeful, dedicated instruction. But there's so many things that go on during the day where you can weave in a little math. For example, asking a child who's distributing the crackers at snack time, how many crackers do you need if you give 2 to each child at your table? Or at rug time in the morning, how many boys are here today? How many girls? How many more boys are there than girls? How many more boys would we need to have the same number of girls? And so on. I just want to end reminding you that there's a lot to math. When I ask preschool teachers what is math for 4-year-olds, the two things that they come up with immediately are counting and shapes. And those are important, but there's so much more. The slide that you're looking at right now comes from a book by Doug Clements, and it just shows you the many different strands of mathematics that children can be learning and gaining a foundation in as early as 3 years old. Even within counting or understanding basic number sense, there's a lot of aspects to number sense that children need to have opportunities to learn. I'm going to end there, but I just want to share with you that there are many more resources available directly related to the kinds of things that I've been talking about on a network that I'm involved with called the Development and Research on Early Math Education, which comes out DREME spelled wrong. If you can see the web address there if you are interested in more information and more kinds of things that are directly related to the teaching of math to young children. And here are all the references to the slides that I showed you. And now I'm going to send you to Jessica and Kristen.
Thank you, Deborah. Now we're going to turn to Kristen Reed and Jessica Young, where we'll hear more about how to use math games to develop young children's mathematical thinking and positive attitudes towards math.
Thank you, Heather. I wanted to start with an audience poll so that we could take a minute to think about our own experiences as learners of math. So choose a time in your life when you were in the position of a math learner, so perhaps when you were a child. Looking at these 4 picture books, which one do you think best describes your experience as a learner of mathematics? So I'll give you all a minute to choose your answer. Hopefully you see the survey and are filling out your responses. Okay, so here we can see that, in fact, we have a range of responses. People chose different books. So really, we wanted to start with this poll to help folks see that we may differ on where we are coming from as learners of math. And it also may be that our feelings about math may have changed over time, but we think it's important to stop and reflect about our own feelings about math and to acknowledge and respect our feelings and each other's experiences, and use this knowledge to help us figure out what is the next step in our growth as teachers of early math. As teachers, we know that we can support children's math learning by giving children opportunities to engage with math concepts in fun, playful, developmentally appropriate ways. But supporting young children to become strong mathematicians requires that not only do we consider which math games and activities will foster learning, but also how we can help children develop positive beliefs and attitudes toward learning math. We've asked this question of the preschool teachers we work with. Do teachers' feelings about math influence children's learning? And most teachers nod their head in agreement. Well, this is backed up by several different research studies that have shown that adults, both parents and teachers, attitudes toward math influence children's attitudes and achievement. In one research study conducted with elementary school teachers, the teacher's own math anxiety was negatively related to their students' math achievement. In essence, the higher the level of math anxiety held by the teachers, who were primarily women, the lower the math achievement for the girls in their classes, but not for the boys. In addition, girls in these classrooms were more likely to hold the commonly held stereotype that boys are good at math and girls are good at reading. Another study found that parents' high math anxiety negatively impacted their children's math achievement. Our own work has shown that in classrooms with teachers who had high levels of math anxiety, girls made smaller gains in math compared to girls in classrooms where teachers had lower levels of math anxiety. But why is this? Well, it may be that girls look up to their female teachers and identify with them and their likes and dislikes. If a teacher is conveying the idea that math is hard for them or that they just are not a math person, girls may be particularly attuned to noticing this message. Another possibility is that teachers could hold an unconscious bias and not even realize that they haven't provided as many math activities as art or literacy activities. Imagine a typical morning in the preschool classroom. Time goes by quickly, and now there's only enough time for one more activity. If we held an unconscious math bias, we might choose to do the art activity or the book reading we have planned, rather than the math activity. Not with any malintent, but rather because we tend to prefer art. So how do we want children to experience being learners of mathematics? Well, here's a hint. It's not like this sad little kiddo. So here are some things we want to avoid saying. I hate math. I'm not a math person. Don't worry. I wasn't good at math either. Math myths are everywhere, and they can send the message that there are people in the world who can do math and people who can't. But this isn't true. We want all children to have a can-do attitude about math. But if they think they don't have a math brain, they may not invest time or effort into learning math. So what can we do to foster positive attitudes toward math? Well, the first thing to do is adopt a positive attitude ourselves. Children learn from everything we do, so modeling enjoyment, curiosity, and a willingness to try new things and even make mistakes goes a long way to encouraging a positive attitude toward learning. So notice your own feelings about math and try to be conscious of the ways that you introduce and integrate these activities into your classroom. If you are enjoying playing with math, they will too. Replace math anxiety with motivation, persistence, and positive messages like, math is fun. I love puzzles because I like to problem solve. Let's play a math game. So in our professional development program, part of our work with teachers has been to address their attitudes toward math. So this quote comes from a Head Start teacher we worked with in Worcester, Massachusetts. I've changed the way I present activities. I'm super excited about math now. They love it because I say, yay, a new math game. I don't think I ever presented it in such a happy, positive way. And that helps them want to be involved because I like it too. I used to think I'm not a math person, and I wasn't thinking about how my feelings came out to the children. So why did we choose math games as our activity? Well, math games are fun. People love to play math games. They spark big mathematical ideas. So, for example, board games can help children develop one-to-one correspondence, as children have to match each space with a count word as they move their game piece along the board. Games promote problem solving. During gameplay, children can try out new strategies, seeing what works and why. So, for example, when children are playing with pattern block puzzles or tangrams, they can try pieces in different spots. They can flip them, they can turn them, and see which way works best. Games also promote persistence. Children are more likely to keep trying when playing a game and not feeling the pressure of getting it right. Games also support children's social emotional skills. Young children are just starting to learn skills like being patient and taking turns. They're also learning how to be good sports, winning and losing graciously and respectfully. These skills are important both in school and in life. So now I will turn this over to Kristen Reed, who will be showing you all some of the early math games that we developed as part of our Young Mathematicians work.
Thanks, Jessica. Now we're going to get to play some of our favorite early math games. Now, I am told that our slides, as we progress them, is about 10 seconds behind what you are seeing. So this will be a little problematic because a lot of the slides that I have are dependent on timing, but we're going to do our best. So a game we like to talk about first with teachers is a game that helps, that uses fingers. Is a game that uses fingers to help children with counting, knowing how many in all, seeing how many immediately, and composing and decomposing numbers, which is the basis of adding and subtraction, addition and subtraction. This is one of our favorite easy games because your fingers are always with you. You always have the materials you need. I'm going to show you what it is, and then we'll talk a little bit about how it's important. So the next few slides have fingers on them. When you know how many fingers you see up, you call it out and try showing how many on your own hands. Everyone got your fingers ready? So numbers, 1, 2, 3. How many do you see? All right, 5. So this is a great activity for young children. They can count their teachers' or parents' fingers, or they may be able to see immediately that there are 2 fingers on one hand and 3 fingers on the other. Put that together and know there are 5 in all, and they're making 5 on their own hands. And then you can do an easy variation. Can you show 5 fingers in a different way? You might show 5 and 0, or 1 and 4, or 3 and 2 a different way. So on these slides, we focused on 5 to help children understand the complements to 5. Or sometimes we like to say it helps children see the smaller numbers that are hiding inside of 5. But of course, you can play with 2, 3, 4, and other numbers. For preschoolers, having a strong sense of the numbers 1 through 5 is really important. In kindergarten, children will start working on the complements of 10 and higher. And sometimes in kindergarten or first grade, when we play this game, we work together with a friend so that we have 4 hands that can together make the numbers up to 20. Interestingly, researchers have recently found out that when children study math facts in conceptual groupings like this, all the ways to make 5 or later, combinations of 10 or 15, it builds a stronger understanding and longer-term retention of math facts. And there's been research about the value of young children using their fingers to help them learn about numbers. Kids can feel the quantity on their hands, have a visual representation of quantity, as well as develop a mental picture. Some of us may have been told not to use our fingers, but recent neuroscience research shows that one of the areas of the brain that's responsible for knowing quantities is also responsible for finger discrimination, and it's also the part of the brain responsible for spatial reasoning. Spatial reasoning will help kids locate a number's location on a number path. Of course, once children have established a strong understanding of quantity, they may not need to or not choose to physically use their fingers. This is a quote from a Head Start teacher in Nashua, New Hampshire, who has been playing math games in her classroom during the year. She said, "After playing these games, my preschoolers really started enjoying math. They get excited when I say I have a new math game, and now they'll even do fingers, 1, 2, 3 on their own. They love it." This teacher told us that children were even going home asking their parents to play finger counting games too. And there are lots of different games that you can play with dot cards, and we'll talk about a couple of them. So this first one is quick images. And it's popular in some elementary school curriculum and works well in preschool too. In preschool, you might focus on numbers 1 to 5, at least to start, and in elementary school, work with higher numbers as well. We're going to try doing a few dot cards, and I made this set a bit harder because you've all graduated from preschool, and I think you're ready. So with children, I do about 3 seconds or so, but with you, I'll do it in less, as long as our slide advancing cooperates. I'll show you an image, so get your fingers ready. Then show on your fingers how many dots you see. We're going to do 3 of them, then talk about them. So how many did you see? How many did you see? And how many did you see? Oh, very last one. So this last slide will show you the 3 cards that I flashed for about a second each. There were 8 dots on each card. This skill we just used is called conceptual subitizing, and it's a really important early math skill. Subitizing comes from the Latin and Italian word subito, which means immediately or suddenly. When kids are able to subitize, to recognize small quantities immediately, they actually do better in math later on. Children who have strong visual images of quantity are better able to manipulate numbers, so we need to expose children to lots of different visual images: fingers, dots, cubes, blocks, any toys, etc. So the next slide I'm going to show has two different rows with one row in gray and one row with color. And it helps us talk a little bit more about subitizing. So it turns out that humans are really good at subitizing small quantities, 1, 2, 3. And studies on little babies show that they recognize and discriminate between these small quantities. But when numbers get bigger, we tend to chunk them into small groups and then quickly add them together. Once you get into larger numbers, like the 8 on this slide, we use a combination of strategies. In the first column, the gray lends itself to counting one by one in a row. But that's not as efficient as if you use the color to chunk and see 4 and 4. The arrays in the next column are a great way to organize counting, and even easier when you add color. The circle's tricky because you have to keep track of where to start and stop when it's all gray. And again, it's a little easier in color. In the scattered configuration, it can be hard to keep track. But again, the color helps because it breaks the dots into two smaller groups. So I'm going to show you another game with dot cards. And in this game, the teacher may start by showing a card with 5 dots, or the teacher could use a card with the numeral 5 on it. Then, it would lay out several cards on the table for children to choose from. And teacher might ask, can you find a card with the same number of dots as mine? Right? Hopefully you can see it now. And it would be the card on the left, the same matching 5 dots also. And can you find a card with one more dot than mine? And that would be the card in the middle with 6 dots. Can you find a card with one fewer dot than my card? The one on the right with 4 dots. It's important to work on this idea of one more and one less, because it helps children develop a sense of numbers in relation to each other. And you can make the game more challenging by adding more cards or working with higher numbers as kids' skills grow. So the book 10 Black Dots by Donald Cruz is a great literature link to this math activity. And you can see the display board of children's drawings on the right. They pasted black dots to create their own pictures, and the teacher transcribed what the children said. For example, I use 3 dots for my robot, or I have 6 birds. Now we'll talk a little about number path games. You see one game here with children hopping on the number path on the floor. With games like this, children can roll a die and move that number of spaces. Or in some classrooms, we've seen one child take the role of the jumper and have another child take the role of the caller and call out to jump forward 2 spaces. And the jumper has to jump 2 spaces and say the number she's jumping on. There are lots of different ways to play with these number path games. So number path games are valuable for practicing several early math skills, such as recognizing written numerals. It helps when the numbers are printed on the spaces. They're valuable for one-to-one correspondence. Children are practicing synchronizing a jump with a count word. They have to coordinate movement with saying the number as they move on the number path, just like their hand and their mouth have to coordinate when they're counting objects on the table. When children use dice, they're practicing subitizing, knowing how many immediately. And children are gaining experience with number magnitude, knowing that as you count in a sequence, each number is just 1 bigger than the previous number. And they gain a sense of how far apart numbers like 3 and 10 are from each other. In these games, children are also working on composing and decomposing numbers. If you're on 2 and roll 3, you count on and land on the 5. This is another game we really like, jumping on the lily pads. It's a tabletop version of the picture you saw earlier. This shows it with a frog jumping on lily pads, but children can adapt it, or teachers can adapt this to their theme, such as bees landing on flowers in the spring. The object of the game is to jump to the 10 and go for a swim. You can make the path longer to 20 or shorter to 5, whatever works in your classroom. In this game, you place your frog on home, take turns rolling the dot cube, move that number of spaces until you get to the pond, go for a swim, and roll the dice to jump back to home. We like to make our own dice, as you see in the picture. These dice have only 1 to 3 dots on them, rather than the 1 to 6 dots like a typical 6-sided die. That gives you a little more control over what numbers the children are working with. Games like this spark a lot of rich mathematical questions and conversations. We hear teachers saying things like, if you're on 6, what's the next number? You're going to jump from 6 to 7. Who's closer to the pond? Who's further away from the pond? It's going to take how many more hops to get to the pond? In the classrooms we work with, many children have not had the experience of playing board games, so learning how to roll a die and move forward that number of spaces is new to them. Children have to learn that you don't count the space you're on. You jump forward as you're moving on the number path. This then helps them when they're learning to add and subtract. The teachers we've worked with have had positive experiences using math games in their classrooms. This quote came from a Head Start teacher in Lawrence, Massachusetts. I said to my preschoolers, if you want to do math today, go to the circle table. And everyone went to the circle table. I've never seen it like that before. Math is something they're so excited about. They love that game. So just some couple takeaways. To be positive about math, remember your attitude matters and it's contagious to children. Have fun introducing and integrating activities. Use books and games to promote playful math. There's finger games, card games, board games to build children's understanding of number and the number line. And again, some of our websites and further resources for you to look at later. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Deborah, Kristen, and Jessica. That was absolutely terrific. This is Lisa Hansel, and I am just absolutely thrilled to be here with you all and with our huge audience, over 2,000 educators, to do some Q&A. We have gotten just dozens and dozens of questions throughout these fascinating presentations, so I am going to do my best to combine some questions and summarize so that we hit as many of the topics that were covered in the many questions as possible. So Deborah, I'm actually going to start with you, and I'm going to bring you back to some points you raised about teachable moments. So two related questions that came up. One was on the issue of teachable moments and having an actual sort of plan for instruction, and wondering, is there a good way to keep track of what children are learning through teachable moments so that you can then sort of look ahead to your plan and figure out what still needs to be taught intentionally? And then sort of a complementary question that was typed in was about the idea of having a full year math curriculum mapped out in advance, and whether or not teachable moments should be considered really only supplements, like should they only be there to go deeper and provide extra practice? So that's, I guess, a lot of interest here in how we should consider teachable moments and how they should be part of the way you described teaching, which is providing learning opportunities.
I'm going to start with the last question first, which is, yes, you do need to map out your curriculum for the year, but it also needs to be very flexible. I mean, that's why I think standards are good, because you have some sense of where you need to get to, although the pace may be different, and it may be different for different children, but you do need to have a plan. I like to think of teachable moments as basically enrichment opportunities. So they're building on the, I don't want to use the word formal, but the structured or planned instructional time that you're having. So if the children are working on basic operations, they're learning to add and subtract within 10 objects, then I might, in my teachable moments, want to build on that, take opportunities to build on what they're learning in the larger instructional activity, so that there's some kind of coherence. They're not completely separate.
Okay, great. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for clarifying there. So now I'm going to turn back to Jessica and Kristen, and this time I'm going to mash up a whole bunch of questions. So we had a series of questions about involving parents and math games that could easily be sort of digested into newsletters and other forms of communicating with parents, sort of easy things to do at home or at the grocery store. And then at the same time, there were a series of questions related to technology, particularly tablets and iPads, and whether or not you would recommend any of the games that are on tablets and aimed at children, and particularly, I guess, marketed at parents and helping them do some, home-based fun math activities. So what's your take on that issue of what's the best way to involve parents, and what do you think of the, essentially the math games that are out there on tablets?
Thanks, Lisa. I just wanted to say one thing about Teachable Moments too, which is that having that plan, knowing where you're going and your standards for the year really help you know which Teachable Moments to take advantage of. So if you have in your mind where you want to be going with your kids, you can say, oh, I'm going to really go with this one, and maybe something else you might not take as far, but you know what your plan and your ultimate goal is, and that really helps. About parents. Yeah, thank you. And I think that the web link is up there now. So if at the NAEYC.org Math at Home website, there are a bunch of different ideas and activities and these mini books that you can use with parents. We've had a lot of luck. We just finished a research study where we had teachers play math games, some of the ones we showed you, in the classroom, and send home a similar set of math games for parents to use with these little mini books. And these mini books you can print them out double-sided, and then you just fold them into fourths and cut them and staple them. And it then gave parents some language to use with their children and showed them a way to play a game that they could then keep playing later on. And they're cute because kids can color in them. They can really make them their own little book, and they're cheap for programs to print out.
One nice thing about the mini books, too, for the families is that in the mini book we do have a little description about the math that the children are learning, and we really hope that the parents can take advantage of the mini book as a type of game. There's always an activity at the end of the mini book as well that parents and children can play together. And we've gotten a lot of feedback about how everything was very understandable, and they're really excited that they can play and do math with their preschoolers and young children.
Yeah. And going back to some of the slides that Deborah showed at the beginning, where there's a gap in learning between the higher income and lower income kids, we really believe that some of these supports at home are going to be very helpful as a strategy for reducing that gap and giving kids more opportunities to learn math in all their environments. About the technology and tablets and all of those games, that's a great question that lots of people ask. And usually the way I respond is the most important thing is the parent-child interaction or the teacher-child interaction. So if you're interacting around an app or a game and it's keeping your attention as an adult and the child's attention, and you can do it together, that's a good activity to do together. But it's not always a great choice to make for the kid to do independently. It's not as valuable as the interaction between parent and child or teacher and child.
Yeah, if we specifically chose hands-on materials for our games because we really wanted children to have that kinesthetic, that real hands-on activities that help them to embody math, embody number, to really understand quantity. So we do really recommend that it can be a combination of apps, but we do think that the hands-on materials are also very important for children's development.
Okay, great. Well, I think that adds an awful lot of explanation. That is terrific. And I'm going to build on the end of that response in terms of this idea of really helping children understand quantity. This relates to a few questions that came in earlier about what if we were thinking a little bit younger than preschool. And I know that most of the audience was preschool educators, but of course, we always end up with a range of children in the classroom, and certainly some of the audience is working with infants and toddlers. So if we think a little bit more about educating toddlers and maybe educating the younger preschoolers and those who have not had a lot of math exposure at home, how do you start that process of getting to understand numbers? And Deborah, do you want to start? And I apologize, that's a big question and only a few minutes to answer it. But if you can start us down that path, and then maybe Jessica and Kristen, you could think about what are some of the math games that would be easiest for educators and parents to use, and which ones you would advise starting with for our toddlers.
I think counting objects is one of the best ways to get going with kids, and you can do this with 2-year-olds. And you can also weave it into regular activities. So you don't want to sit down with the 2-year-old and have a math lesson, but you can count the buttons as you're buttoning his shirt. You can count together the steps that you're walking up to the front door of the school. Parents, if they go grocery shopping with their child, they can have their child help them count how many oranges they're putting in the bag. So I think counting, and always with objects, is a really productive activity to engage in young children. And also just to introduce math language. Wow, you're really tall, and you're very short. Look how much taller Jimmy is than Jose. So I think there are many, many ways you can introduce math concepts in everyday context with very young children, so that when they are 3 and 4 and begin to get these more planned activities, they're really prepared for them.
Okay, great. So we have just a couple minutes left. So Jessica and Kristen, we went ahead and put up your slide here about takeaways to remember. So maybe you can address very quickly the issue of the 2-year-olds and the sort of early preschoolers, and think about some of these takeaways that you have given us.
Thanks, Lisa. This slide is helpful. So like Deborah said, I think a lot of it in those early years is building up the language. So using the more than, fewer than, same as, and using a lot of spatial language when you're talking with children. Also focusing children's attention on attributes. So there's some great activities you could do, sorting the laundry at home. This sock is really soft. This piece of paper is smooth. So it's focusing on the attributes of things, whether they're fuzzy or silky, and kind of giving kids different language to be able to start them on a math trajectory.
Yeah, another thing that we really enjoy as well is singing songs. A lot of songs have repeating patterns within them. Babies love songs. We're always singing and cooing to our little ones. So that's a really great way to just, be happy and joyful and enjoy your time with your babies, and also introduce, again, it's about the language when they're really little, helping them to understand the world around them. I think math really just helps children to understand the world, to see the patterns around them, and to learn more as they go along.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. That is a perfect way to wrap up, just to remind all of us that math is all around us every day, whether we're singing or cooking or doing laundry, and it's just up to us to, in these simple ways, bring that math to the foreground for the children in our lives. So Deborah, Jessica, and Kristen, I cannot thank you enough to all of the educators and administrators who joined us this afternoon. Thank you so very much. And the one most common question we got, of course, because this was a very popular webinar, was when we'll be able to see the slides and be able to share this webinar with friends and colleagues. And we absolutely will have that on the NAEYC website very shortly. So double check there in a couple of weeks, I think. I'm looking over at a colleague. She's confidently shaking her head. So, okay, wonderful. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. And to all the educators out there, thank you so much for the work that you're doing with children and bringing math into their lives.